My name is Dave Sussman. I am the host of a show called Whiskey Politics. We're on America's Voice Network. And you can also find us on YouTube, ricochet.com, and all of your podcast applications of choice, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and so on. I'm delighted to be here today to talk about liberty, and there's no other person better right now to talk about liberty, especially when it relates to the next generation, the millennials, as well as the college students, than Charlie Kirk. Charlie is the founder and CEO of Turning Point USA, and Turning Point USA is a national student movement and multiple universities all across the United States, and he is in direct contact with those people that are going to be carrying the baton on the next generation. So I'd like everybody to give a warm welcome to Charlie Kirk.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Charlie.
Yeah, you bet.
So the subject of this interview today is liberty. Just from a standpoint of where you've come from, where you are right now, you're speaking with college students all across the United States. Turning Point is a massive organization. How did you start Turning Point? This is your baby, right?
So I started this organization when I was 18 years old in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. Prior to that, I wanted to go to the West Point, United States Military Academy at West Point. Didn't get in, ended up being the best thing that never happened to me. And I'm actually still consider myself a member of the Liberty Movement. I remember being 14, 15, and 16 years old, reading Milton Friedman, Ludwig von Mises, F.A. Hayek, all the great thinkers that have really articulated what liberty means and how we're supposed to defend it and the philosophical basis of that. My teachers would be like, wait, who's this Milton Friedman guy? And like, why do you keep on mentioning him? So I started this organization when I was 18. I had no money, no connections, and no idea what I was doing. So I was off to a good start, but I really have lived a only in America story. Only in America could an 18-year-old with a pie-in-the-sky type vision, endless energy, and relentless enthusiasm for core ideas and principles be successful. This could not have happened in Germany or France or Italy. In fact, I was in Europe a couple weeks ago trying to explain what my organization did to a group of Italians. And I said, we go to college campuses, we educate around the ideas of American exceptionalism, free enterprise, and smaller government. And they said, we don't get it. Like, so how do you get money? I said, well, I go to successful business people and entrepreneurs, and I raise capital through our charity. They said, well, do they get like equity? Are they like shareholders? Like, we don't understand. Like, what do they get in return? I said, they get the fulfillment and the satisfaction that these ideas will be spread to millions and millions of people and fight the culture war. Wait, people would voluntarily give you money in America for something? Like, they couldn't understand it. Culturally, they don't understand the idea of generosity or philanthropy. It's, well, why isn't the government just going to take care of that for you? And so I am a byproduct of living in the greatest country in the history of the world, and I'm now the luckiest 24-year-old ever to live, where we're now on 1,300 college and high school campuses. We have the amazing Candace Owens, who's our communications director, doing an unbelievably great job. You should give it up for her. We're really fighting this culture war in a way that has not been done in a long time.
So when I was 18, and that's in the 1980s or something, but I wasn't focused on politics, and if I was focused on politics, it was from a leftist perspective, because most kids leaned from an emotional standpoint towards leftism, liberalism. How does an 18-year-old in your situation feel like he believes in conservative and liberty-based values?
So growing up in a public high school outside of Chicago, I was inundated with culturally Marxist, postmodernist ideas before I even realized what those terms even meant. And it would always be about the forming of America, put simply, as I was taught, was an illegal formation, stealing the lands from indigenous people, built on the ideas of white supremacy, oppressing those that could not defend themselves, building a patriarchy and exploiting anyone that... So everything that you hear from the modern Democrat Party, I was experiencing when I was 14 years old. And I remember, being 14 or 15, asking my teachers questions saying, well, there has to be something good that this country has done before. Oh, no, it's been all terrible, it's been all evil, it's a disaster. So you have one of two choices. You can either conform or you can challenge. Those are the two things you can do, and I decided to challenge respectfully, and I found on YouTube, back when YouTube wasn't what it is today, back in like 2006, I was, YouTubing videos of Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman of how to defend the free market. And I ended up, after one YouTube video, I knew more about economics than my economics teacher, because obviously she had no idea what she was talking about. She came in from a Keynesian Marxist perspective. But I realized quite quickly I was given a gift of being able to have the gift of language, the gift of dialogue, and to be able to challenge people rather quickly, but then I also had an equal amount of enthusiasm and passion for that sort of conflict and that sort of discussion, because it's important. And I realized there were a lot of people in my class and a lot of people in my local high school that agreed with me, and so I found this passion very early on, and I'm not alone. There are millions of high school students that are going through the same discovery process, through finding our videos, reading the great books, reading Ayn Rand, you name it, and they're pushing back against the Marxist dominance in our high schools and eventually our colleges. And so I was just lucky enough to do something about it and be successful.
Wow. So you're in 1,300 universities. That's a lot of students combined.
Lot of students, yeah.
Okay. What is Turning Point today doing to promote liberty? And what is the understanding of liberty?
Well,
I mean, as a definition to start with.
At least and I consider myself a conservatarian, so I'm kind of in both, conservative libertarian mixtures, so I can be in both.
Right.
Very libertarian on a lot of issues, more traditionally conservative on other issues. Look, liberty to me is being able to do whatever you want, however you want to do it, where you want to do it, as long as it doesn't harm someone else. That's how I define liberty. And I think that's a message that can appeal to all Americans. It's tough at times because that means you might have to hear ideas you disagree with. That means you might have to defend what is called hate speech on our college campuses. That might mean you have to be okay with someone doing a substance that you personally wouldn't want to do yourself. That also means that you might have to be okay with someone owning a firearm that you wouldn't want to own yourself. But liberty is not supposed to always be comfortable. It's supposed to. I would rather live in dangerous liberty than comfortable slavery. And you make that argument to young people, and some students actually do want to be taken care of. They would rather live a very simple, mediocre life where they get stuff given to them, and that's fine. But what the biggest problem is, the left, they always try to break economic freedom, personal freedom. No, there's just freedom. You cannot segment freedom. You can't say, you can say whatever you want to say, however you want to say it, but then we're going to take 90% of your money away from you. It doesn't work that way. As soon as you give the government the power to take away your earnings and to take away your time and your treasure and your talent, they will equally be able to censor your speech. Just look at the UK. For the London, for example, with what's going on with their horrible anti-free speech legislation. They say, oh, don't worry, we're going to protect freedom of speech, we're going to protect your ability to say whatever you want to say, ever want to say it, but we're going to have huge social welfare programs. Well, look, I mean, they don't have a commitment to the First Amendment like we do here in this country, and so you can't separate freedom, you can't separate liberty. So my argument on a college campus is, don't tell me how to live my life, and I'm not going to tell you how to live yours.
What's the state of understanding of that on the college campus? I know you've done a lot of man-on-the-street type interviews, right?
And challenging protesters.
And folks, find these on YouTube, by the way. They're fascinating. It will fill an evening with just anger and glee at the same time, because you understand that you're talking to kids that don't know anything, right? How much of those are the exception to the rule, or how much of those are the norm?
I'd say they are the exception. I have an amazing amount of faith and confidence in our generation. I really do, because it's not that young people are opposed to our ideas, as they're not being exposed to them at all in the first place. There is an intentional silencing by the left, by the Marxists, to make sure these ideas are not being presented or given a platform at all, because they're threatened by them. They're threatened by the idea of a competition of ideas. Having a marketplace of differentiating opinions is something that a leftist and a Marxist will run away from. In fact, I gravitate towards that. When we go on college campuses, this is a rule that a lot of speakers are now instituting, such as Ben Shapiro. I say anyone who disagrees with me goes to the front of the line. We want that disagreement. We want that kind of engagement. Before any campus speech that I do, I will set up shop on the quad, or the area where all the traffic is. We'll film it, and we'll do what's called a prove me wrong or change my mind type event for 3 hours. Anyone can come up and ask me anything about any topic at any time. I've never seen a leftist get even close to doing that, because they're afraid of that sort of disagreement and that dialogue. But I will say this, the radicals and the social justice warriors that I have made a quite visible digital brand around challenging and making look silly and foolish, they are a vocal minority. They are not a majority. They are not. Most young people couldn't care less about politics. They really couldn't. They might have a little opinion one way or the other, but the deference will go towards government, get out of my life. That's if argued properly and put forth in a way that they can understand and make an informed decision, They'll say, yeah, I want to pay less taxes. I don't want government to tell me how to live, who to marry, what to do, where to purchase my goods and services. So there is that default position towards liberty. And in fact, the socialists and the Marxists, they know this, so they sell socialism and Marxism as if it's the pro-freedom solution. They say, we're the ones that are going to defend your freedom and liberty, which is anything, it's the farthest thing from the truth, but they understand that young people and people in general want to be free.
I want to talk about a couple of specific issues now. Last time you and I met, you were with Candace, and we had you on Whiskey Politics, and it was another long form. And one of the issues that we discussed, and Candace really headed this up as well, is the black youth. Okay, African American voters and their understanding of liberty and individualism and classic liberalism. And we've seen subsequently since that point a massive movement right now, which is mostly online, that if I can arguably state, I think really came from both of you and Turning Point USA, especially Candace Owens. People are walking away from the left.
Yes.
Okay. What are you seeing right now on the college campuses, especially when it comes to the African American vote?
We see unbelievable amount of movement and progress. And mind you, if Republicans win 15-20% of the black vote, the Democrat Party is done. I mean, so think about it. If Democrats win 80% of the black vote, they lose everything. And there is no segment of the population, except maybe the Native Americans, but there is no segment of the population that has been lied to as much and had a greater disservice done to them than black Americans at the hands of the Democrat Party. There is no greater segment of the population. If you want to see an American ghetto, I will show you a Democrat in charge. Every screwed up city in America has Democrat councilmen, Democrat mayors, Democrat, all across the board, whether it be Oakland, Chicago, San Francisco, it is all across the board.
Yep.
And you look at African Americans, they were, and this is an argument that Candace Owens makes very, very well. She said, how is it my grandfather, who grew up under segregation in a much more bitterly racist country than my father, did much better and has done much better than my father? So how is it that for the African American story, you got generationally worse as times actually got better? Well, it's because of the Great Society passed by Lyndon Baines Johnson. It's because of the great moral failure of our public education system. Government should get completely out of education, totally and completely. And I would make the argument, growing up, this is a big thing I want to express, and some people might disagree with me. Growing up, I was told to always give the benefit of the doubt to the opposition, that Democrats, I might disagree with them, but they mean well. They just have a different means to go about solutions. I no longer believe that. I believe that Democrats and leftists, the leaders in particular, I think the followers do mean well. I think there's a lot of good Democrat voters, but the leaders, they want to keep poor people poor. In fact, they're really good at it. They want to keep they want to keep their constituents dependent on government. They want to keep people that are living in poverty continuing having to apply for food stamps and having to live in government housing, because as long as you can control that segment of the population, you can win re-election. Ask no one further than the con artist herself, Maxine Waters, who is a low IQ individual, by the way. She lives in a $6 million house outside of her district.
Hancock Park.
Yeah,
yep.
You know about,
Yep.
and her constituency is one of the poorest in the entire country. What has she done to make African Americans' lives better? And nothing is the answer. And so for us Republicans, we see a great opportunity because we have such an unconventional president who is unafraid to challenge issues that traditional Republicans have always considered to be third-rail issues. And some issues such as illegal immigration, trade, things that can be marketed towards a black population that has been totally lied to and totally done a disservice by the Democrat Party, we can see that great defection starting to happen. And I can submit one piece of evidence. If I was making an argument in a courtroom, why is it that during the State of the Union, the Congressional Black Caucus stayed seated when record low black unemployment was announced? They were upset. They were angry. They were disturbed that black people are doing better, because they know that if black people start to have jobs and higher wages and get off of government assistance, they won't be Democrats any longer, and that they're going to lose re-election. And so we have to make the argument that we should judge success by not how many people we sign up for food stamps, but how many people we get off of food stamps. How many people that break out of poverty, not stay in poverty. That's the argument we have to make.
Kanye West came out, supported Trump, but mostly he stood up and he says, I believe in individuality.
Yes.
I believe in individualism. Because I have a black skin does not mean that I have to vote Democrat. And he was pilloried. He's gone a little quiet since. What do you think's happened there?
I don't know if quiet. I mean, he's become. He kind of came out with a boom. You got to give him credit for that, and he didn't back down. So here's what I love about Kanye West. Unlike any of these.
By the way, Candace was with him at what was that, TMZ?
Yeah, I was there.
And
too.
you were there too. Okay.
Yeah. So I got to give him credit. He comes out and says, first and foremost, I love the way Candace Owens thinks, which started this whole snowball. And then people lose their mind. How dare you say something good about a black conservative? And he says, oh yeah? You think that's bad? I'm going to post a picture of me wearing a Trump hat. And then they lose their mind even more. And then, even better, he doesn't apologize. Doesn't apologize. And every music expert, they're almost as bad as the political experts, by the way, these musical experts. They should all be fired. They're horrible. Kanye West has destroyed his career, comes out with an album. #1 in 83 countries, best album he's ever had, and he never apologized for his support of Donald Trump. He was in support of individual thought and free thought, and he said, I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, but I like some things Trump is doing. I don't agree with everything he said he's doing. And then my favorite of the whole kind of Kanye West story was when Chance the Rapper tweets out, not all black people have to be Democrats. And people lose their mind. They say, what are you talking about? Of course they have to be Democrats. That's a horribly racist thing to say, that black people have to be like, you have to think a certain way because of your skin color. Think about that. I mean, think about if you said that about any other segment of the population. White people have to think a certain way, Asian people. That's a really, really racist thing to say. And then he, of course, apologized. Oh, no, I didn't mean it that way. Then how did you mean it? Like, it's such a simple thing. Not all black people need to be Democrats. He tweeted that out. It totally broke the internet in kind of support of Kanye, and then he comes out and apologizes. I'm sorry if I offended people. That shows how out of balance our political dialogue and discourse is. And my argument to people that are on the left and are black Democrats that want to serve their constituencies, there's nothing healthy about a segment of the population voting 95% Democrat. Here's why. No one has to compete for their vote. If it's automatic and it is considered to be just incumbent and this person's going to win, then there's no collision of ideas. There's no people trying to find solutions. And so that is why battleground districts, there's so much competition, like we're going to improve this, we're going to improve that, and they have to be held accountable. But if the person's always going to be reelected on the Democrat ticket, they don't ever have to actually prove results for that district or for that constituency. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for Kanye West and what he did. He's an artist. He's a very, very talented artist, but you got to give him credit. Anyone else would have defected or capitulated and would have issued an apology. In fact, he doubled down. And at TMZ, he said, I quote, Democrats want black people to vote for them just for food stamps. I mean, that's a pretty amazing statement to hear from someone that is a top-tier celebrity. That did not get a lot of play. It's right there on the interview. But when we have celebrities saying that, essentially attacking the welfare state, it's like, and by the way, the last thing I'll say about Kanye, he's retweeting and liking Thomas Sowell tweets. I think that's a pretty good thing. I think we should all applaud him.
Wow.
So.
You know, incidentally, after that whole thing happened, a poll came out and it said African-American male support for Donald Trump has doubled from 11 to 22%. You were saying that they need 90% to win a presidential election. It's doubled to 22%.
It's in danger zone. It is in danger zone.
What are you hearing on the college campuses right now, especially with African-Americans?
I mean, look, at least from anecdotal experience, there was a great video that came out we did at Stanford University where a black guy comes up and he says, I was a Democrat, I was a Black Lives Matter guy. Candace, you opened my eyes. I'm off the plantation. It's this unbelievable video. If you haven't seen it, it has 30 million views. Very, very powerful. And look, Candace's whole message, of which I'm in support of, I'm obviously a doctrinaire, conservative, libertarian and all this, but our first message is just defect. Just become an independent. You don't have to be dogmatically leftist. Just consider other ideas, consider other opinions. You don't have to be so far to the left that you'll never consider voting or hearing the other opinion. And once that starts to happen, then you'll start to have a real marketplace of ideas and a competition to earn people's vote.
One of the things that I think has been extremely challenging for libertarians and conservatives or conservatarians is messaging. And I think this is really where what you guys are doing is so important today. You go onto a college campus and you talk about free trade, you talk about liberty. It's not a sexy message. You talk about racism and homophobia. That's emotional. That really gets it. So what are you doing right now, especially when it comes to issues like free trade? How do you convey that message to kids, basically?
Sure. Well, it's difficult at times to sell ideas of economics to an audience that is kind of programmed to talk about more like sociological issues. But there is a growing movement out there, and it's evidenced by the rise of Jordan Peterson, who I love, by the way. Jordan Peterson's unbelievably great. That young people in particular are sick of hearing about societal and systemic problems, and they're much more interested of how I can fix my own life. And so a leftist at the very core, what the postmodernists and the Marxists are focused on is not that the individual should ever improve their own life. Not, as Jordan Peterson says, sit up straight, make better choices, tell the truth, all those sorts of things. It's that we live in such a broken system, such a broken culture, that we need radical revolutionary ideas that must all be torn down. And so for a young person that thinks they're a victim, and they're not, and I joked around at Stanford, and I didn't mean to make fun of this person, but I did. What am I talking? Of course I meant. I mean, of course. She comes up to me and she says, "You have no sympathy or compassion for me, blah blah blah. I'm a victim." It's okay. Tell me your story. Tell me why you're a victim. And she had a tough upbringing. So did Candace. So they want to play the victimhood Olympics. Candace is like the gold medal winner, right? She's like it's like the Michael Phelps of golden, of oppression Olympics. Anyway, I said, fine. That's all horrible. I said, so you're a black person and you go to Stanford, right? And she said, yes. I said, you're like the last thing from a victim. Like, just like do something with your life. You go to Stanford. Like, I mean, that's a big deal. It's like, oh no, I'm such a victim. I can't possibly ever succeed, blah, blah, blah. So if you're looking for someone to blame, you're never going to run out of choices. And the left understands this. And we are more than just a political movement, even more than a philosophical one. We're talking about personal development at this core, because the left is very hesitant to ever talk about the betterment of the individual to overcome adversity. But that is the story of Western civilization. It is the contrast of the Soviet Union, where it was all about the collective. It was all about the greater good, even though 100 million people lost their lives in pursuit of the greater good, in pursuit of utopia. Or are we going to have Western civilization where we start the conversation with, we admit the following: life is suffering. Like, we admit that life is difficult. Okay, we got that. What do you do about it? Do we have huge social welfare programs and big government that's going to try to rearrange our choices and our sociological and societal imperfections? Or do we admit that life is suffering and we learn how the individual can better their own choices and their own decisions so that we can improve, and that we understand that we are going to endure a lot of adversity, that we're going to endure imperfection, sadness, disappointment. We're going to fall short of the mark a lot of the time. There's going to be days where we're not very happy. But that's okay, and you admit that, but you say, how am I going to overcome that? And that's the story of Western civilization, not the idea or the pursuit of utopianism, which the more people have died in the pursuit of utopianism than any other idea in the 20th century. And so we reject that, and there's a big interest in that on college campuses, believe it or not.
So you're talking about these pivotal issues, and these are the issues, these are the structures of our great economic systems, our philosophies. And people seem to be getting it to a certain extent, but then you have these issues like trade and Trump and free trade, and again, we're talking about complex economic systems. Sure. How is that being conveyed, and what are people saying on those issues, especially in the headlines today?
I don't know if I'm going to win some favor or lose some favor, but I'm just going to say this. Libertarians and conservatives, but libertarians should be very, very happy with the job President Trump is doing. I mean, he's by far the most libertarian president of our lifetime. I look at what he's done. What other Republican president would possibly critique the Iraq War the way that he's been critiquing? You think Jeb Bush would be doing that? You think that any of the other Republican candidates on the stage, except Rand Paul, would be criticizing U.S. foreign policy decisions the way that he's doing this? Do you think that a traditional Republican president would be going to NATO and saying you have to pay up? Do you think that a traditional Republican president would be going to the UN and saying, why does this even exist? Like, why are we involved in this? In fact, do you think he would be calling up Pakistan and saying, your aid, it's cut, it's done, it's cut, you got to pay up? The point being is that long sought after libertarian objectives and goals, there is real progress being made in that direction. You look at the regulation. I've been going to this conference for a couple of years now, and I've heard, we got to cut regulation. We got to cut regulation. Regulation is the real impediment of business. And I agree, by the way. President Trump pledged on the campaign trail to cut 2 regulations for every new one that is passed. He has cut 22 regulations for every new one that is passed. It is the first time in the history of the Federal Register that it's actually decreased, that it has shrank. It is the greatest deregulation in American history. 867 Obama-era regulations have been cut. Government is smaller today than it was when he took office. 34,000 less federal employees have jobs because they quit because they don't want to work for the guy anymore. So his unpopularity, because of his brazenness, they quit. And he hasn't filled the positions. I think it's great. 9 out of the 14 cabinet agencies are at least 5% smaller today than the day that he took office. There's a lot of reasons for that, but he's looking at every opportunity to try to shrink government. He directed the EPA, which I call the Employment Prevention Agency. It's not the Environmental Protection Agency. He has directed them to cut regulation, to redefine the way that they go after energy policy. We are energy independent, which, by the way, is a huge, long sought-after libertarian goal, right? That we don't have to be dependent on maniacs like Saudi Arabia. But by the way, Saudi Arabia was behind 9/11. That we're finally energy independent for the first time in American history. It's a huge, long sought-after goal. Let's look at the courts. If you look at Neil Gorsuch, and then now soon to be Justice Kavanaugh, on most issues, they're sympathetic with libertarians on guns, on privacy issues, on sovereignty issues. Don't agree with them on everything, but it's a lot better than having another Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Wouldn't you agree? For those of us that agree with traditional libertarian ideas and doctrine. 1 out of 8 of all circuit court judges in America have been appointed and implemented by President Trump. They actually read and understand the Constitution, the foundational, what built Western civilization, the idea of liberty. These judges understand it. Are all of them perfect? No. But again, it's a lot better than the judges that George W. Bush was putting in there that gave us John Roberts that ended up, instituting Obamacare. What am I really getting at here? President Trump gets a lot of flack. He gets a lot of, pushback from people in the Never Trump movement and the intellectual conservative movement and the libertarian movement, some of which I agree with some of the policy disagreements. But there is unmistakable progress being made in the direction of making America more economically free and more in the direction of real gains for liberty. And we must recognize them where they happen and when they happen, and not be dogmatically against Donald Trump because I don't like the way he talks, or he wasn't my guy in the primary, or he doesn't understand road to surfing the way I do. None of that stuff matters as long as we're going in the right direction of liberty.
So when we're talking about, for lack of a better term, never Trumpers, they want to reclassify themselves today. I'm just a Trump skeptic or whatever it may be today. And we've had a few here as well. And generally speaking, they stand up for conservative values. What do you think, and from, again, going back to, because we're talking about trends in liberty, so the trend is what's the next generation coming up with, what is their perspective of what never Trumpers, the individuals that are out there that are saying, yeah, I'm a conservative, but I have a problem with him because of the way he tweets or whatever.
Well, look, I mean,
is that the most critical thing to them, style over substance?
Well, look, I kind of love the tweets recently, by the way, but that's just me. I mean, maybe I'm an outlier. But look, first of all, Trump was not my guy in the primary. So the idea that I'm a sore loser because I didn't support him, that argument has no resonance with me whatsoever. I was a Walker guy, then a Cruz guy, then I got on the Trump train, and that was it. Okay?
Me too.
Fine. Okay. But if your opposition to Donald Trump is rooted in that I'm upset that he's our president because I thought he was going to lose, I have a lot of trouble with that. If it's real policy disagreements, then do so politely and do so, of course, no one's going to agree 100% on every issue unless it's yourself. I don't even agree with myself on every single issue because I change my mind, and that's okay because that's what it's all about. But here's the bigger point, though, and this one of the reason I support Donald Trump as enthusiastically as I do is I fundamentally believe that America and the trajectory that we were on a predictable decline that would have been cemented with the election of Hillary Clinton. They control Hollywood, they control our schools, they control the mechanisms of communication. And the one thing they didn't control, it's not even politics, it's the courts. The left needed the courts to complete their fundamental takeover and transformation of our country. And here comes this billionaire from New York that communicated in a way that most people did not understand, or did not, most people in, the kind of the intellectual conservative libertarian community did not understand or did not sympathize with, and he comes onto the scene and wins in a way that a lot of people would not have predicted. But disagree with him on policy, but also understand how amazing what he's accomplishing is versus what a traditional president would have been doing. And I mean that even in the eyes of Bush. I mean, Bush grew government. Bush was anything but a strong conservative. I mean, you look at Medicare Part B, you look at the growth of the Federal Register, you look at every government agency being increased. But Trump's actually trying to consolidate government agencies. I mean, under Bush, did he have his director of Office of Management Budget come up with a government consolidation plan like Mick Mulvaney just did? By the way, most of you probably didn't even hear about it in the news. He wants to consolidate like 4 of these cabinet officials together. He wants to consolidate energy and commerce and education all into one government agency and reduce it by like 40%. We should be applauding from the rooftops when stuff like that is happening, right? And so there's plenty of critiques that I disagree with, but if done so with the right tone and tenor, I think disagreement's important. But when it comes down to personality disagreements or pejorative-driven insults, I don't have much sympathy for that.
Are the kids seeing that? Are the kids, can they separate it? I mean, I'll give you an example. Right now, Betsy DeVos, education, she wants to repeal the Obama regulations for affirmative action.
Which I agree with.
Right? Basically, it's reverse racism, or racism in a whole. Is there a pushback on the college campus over this?
Well, it's difficult to say because she did it over the summer here, and I haven't been as in. But at least reading the social media kind of reaction to it and kind of what's going on. Most students, again, they repeat what they have been told about the president or about certain ideas, and they don't have much depth to it. And you could see it with some of these man on the street videos where they go and they talk to these students. They say, "What do you think of Trump's Supreme Court pick?" "Oh, he's horrible. He hasn't made it yet." I mean, it's like they don't know what they're talking about. But as far let's talk about that decision that Betsy DeVos put forth, which is phenomenal. I mean, affirmative action is a horribly racist idea. Affirmative action essentially says we're going to judge people on the color of their skin, not the quality of their intellect or their leadership capacity or their merit. And it's very discriminatory against Asian American students in particular. In fact, there was a lawsuit that's been filed against either Princeton or Harvard that shows that an Asian American had to score almost 20% higher than an African American student in order to get into Princeton and Harvard. I thought we were trying to create a colorblind society where people were, as the great words of Martin Luther King, be judged on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. So affirmative action I'm very pleased that it's being repealed and that it's being pushed back. But I can't really speak too much to what the students' reaction is to it, but we should never be afraid. Here's the other thing: is people say, "Charlie, you're so offensive in what you say. You say white privilege is a lie. You say all this, which it is, and it's a racist idea." But I never try to offend people. I just speak the truth, and if that offends you, I don't give a damn. So that's the way I go about it. So.
We've been talking about racism on college campuses, and it's the first thing that comes up. If you say something they disagree with, you're automatically a racist or a homophobe, bigot, sexist, whatever it may be. And so if we're talking about taking that out of the equation of the college entrance exam, putting everybody on a level playing field, there's those that will say, okay, well then all of a sudden the numbers of certain races may go down as far as a percentage of the students that are accepted. And all of a sudden UCLA is now all of a sudden 75% Asian again.
So what? The NBA is 95% black people. So what? I mean, is that something wrong? I'm not protesting against it. I mean, seriously. I mean, I have no problem with UCLA being 75% Asian. By the way, there's reasons why Asian Americans do better at math and science, and some of them is linguistically based because some people that do come from traditional Asian countries such as Japan, Indonesia, or Singapore, if you actually look at the way they do their language, it's a lot easier for young people, infants between the ages of 8 months and 3 years, to learn the counting system, because essentially, Malcolm Gladwell did a huge study on this, but essentially if you were to teach a young person in Japanese, for example, to count 1 to 20, they don't have to learn a new number when they learn the 11. Essentially, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but they say 10, 1, 0, then 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4. So they don't have to learn a new number, therefore they can learn the counting system. Might seem very elementary and non-consequential, but for an 8-month-year-old or a 2-year-old, it's exponentially less amount that they have to learn, so they can be exponentially ahead by the time they're 3 or 4 years old. But also you look at the culture, Asian Americans take schooling very, very seriously. That's a good thing, right? And we should be applauding that. So I have no problem. People say, well, Charlie, it's horrible if Stanford becomes 80% Asian. That's a really racist thing to say. Like, what are you, anti-Asian American? I mean, could you imagine if I say it's a horrible thing if, you know, Stanford becomes 80% black? People would be picketing outside of it. It's a horrible thing to say. So I allow the smartest, most qualified people to go wherever the institutions open themselves to with their own qualifications. I couldn't care less if it's all Asian American. If they deserve to be there, they deserve to be rewarded. That's the way a true meritocracy should exist.
Is that an opportunity for us to have a discussion in society about the actual cultural implications of the family, the breakup of the family in the inner cities or wherever it may be, education, certain elements of our society, certain demographics of the society do put a premium on that?
Sure.
Is that a discussion that could be had, and especially with the next generation coming up, having that discussion with them in an understanding way where they don't yell racism and end the debate?
Well, yeah, correct. So the highest sin that the left always tries to paint against us is that we're racists, and that we're, even though they are the true racists, but don't even get me started on that. I mean, everything they do is rooted in racial division and trying to keep people of different colors in them perpetually and continually poor. Let's put that you know, as a side subset for a second. But you have to challenge the preconceived notions that they have, and you do it politely and you do it intelligently. And so the number one thing I always get is, Charlie, you are coming from a position of privilege. So if you look at kind of the oppressed versus oppressor pyramid, the top of that pyramid, you're looking at it. I am the most privileged person, they say, okay? Which is partly true, by the way, but I have privilege that has nothing to do with skin color. It has to do with coming from a 2-parent household and coming from a suburban background and parents that didn't commit crimes that came with a higher median income. It had nothing to do with skin color, right? So let's just start with that. But that's kind of a subset. So they say white, heterosexual, Christian males are the top of the oppressor kind of pyramid. Okay, so I'm the worst thing that could possibly ever exist. That's why they hate me. They say, Charlie, what you say is immediately discounted and dismissed because of who you are and what you say. So I'll give you a funny story to kind of back this up. I gave a black friend of mine a Thomas Sowell book, and I said, read this, you'll learn a lot. And he said, okay, fine. And he's a liberal. And so he calls me up, and there was no picture on the book jacket. It just said, by Thomas Sowell. And I say that for a reason. He calls me up, and he says, this guy's a horrible racist. This guy says horrible things about the black community. I said, you do know Thomas Sowell is black, right? Oh, it's fine then, it's okay. Wait a second. So it become more or less true based on the author's skin color? Like, it becomes more acceptable that someone can put forth criticism towards the black community or black leaders based on it being a black person? And he said, oh yes, absolutely. And so we teach messenger bias to young people that somehow you cannot say certain things based on your skin color. Make no mistake, truth transcends color. You know, objectivity, facts, rationale, and logic, and history, and reason, those are all true, whether it's a heterosexual white male saying it or a lesbian black person saying it, right? It's all the same. And that's something we have to get away from, that somehow we have messenger bias, that what you're not allowed to say certain things based on your skin color or your background or who you are, but it just shows how corrosive higher education has been towards saying to students, you only should accept certain ideas by certain people that look the way you look. It is the one of the most catastrophic byproducts of identity politics, which is postmodernism.
It is, absolutely. It's Marxist as well. And when did this switch? Because again, I started college in the 1980s, mid-80s, Ronald Reagan was still president. It wasn't like this. Yeah, there was fight, racism and things like this, but it wasn't at this level. Today, everything is viewed through the lens of your skin color or your sexuality. When did it switch?
It's really a really interesting point. I have a book coming out in September that's called Campus Battlefield that does the whole historical analysis of how this happened. And I could tell you from firsthand it's gotten worse in the last couple of years. I mean, I've been doing this now for 6 years. Some of these ideas that I hear, and I hear them so repeatedly, I was not hearing 3 or 4 years ago. And I'll give you an example. I couldn't care less, nor should I never gave any concern towards how many genders there were. It wasn't something that I really focused my attention on. It wasn't something that I really was that concerned about or that I considered to be a pressing issue of our time. But now all of a sudden, I found out there's 84 genders. Okay, and something that they're really passionate about. In fact, they're so passionate that when I say there are only 2 genders, that's considered hate speech. Science is considered hate speech now. In fact, I'll wear a shirt that say there are only 2 genders, and there will be administration officials from the school trying to prevent me from entering campus because I'm going to offend the transgender students. And I have an intelligent conversation. Well, I think I'm intelligent. They have anything but intelligence. And I say, why is this hate speech? Oh, this offends transgenders. This is not an anti-transgender shirt. I'm saying there's two genders. You can pick what gender you want, but they say, well, no, the gender, there's unlimited amount of genders, 84 genders. This is very new. I mean, I haven't experienced it. So it's happening worse. It's worsening, and it's happening quicker than we can ever imagine. And for a particular reason, these ideas have always been there in higher education. Rooted in postmodernism, started in France, introduced through Yale. All bad ideas started in France. Yeah, exactly. The Frankfurt School, exactly. They've been given a bigger platform, but make no mistake, since the election of Donald Trump, the more radical ideas have been given a bigger and bigger platform. The individuals that are on the fringe and that are the radicals are now being presented as the solution, because they say traditional Democrat ideas need to be dismissed. We need Democrat socialism, like the Marxists that won in Brooklyn, Ocasio-Cortez, exactly. And so you see the infiltration of these postmodernist Marxist ideas being given bigger and bigger platform, for the worse, I would say.
Yeah, it's a pretty scary situation, and unfortunately, I feel like the pendulum has swung so far in an extreme direction. And you just talk about Ocasio-Cortez. The left seem to be going even further left.
Yes.
And we've got a big election coming up here, and I know that you guys are really focused on the youth and getting the message out. What are you guys doing to get actual people to the polls?
Yeah, we're not doing as much on the political side. We're more involved in the cultural world. Politics is downstream from culture, as the great Andrew Breitbart used to say, which is 100% totally true. And so what I never consider to be a controversial statement is how I open every single speech. I say America's the greatest country in the history of the world. And half of the college audience will disagree with that. I consider that to be an irrefutable statement, that we are the luckiest people ever to live in America at this time. We are 5% of the world's population. We control 80% of the world's economic output. Americans independently and voluntarily gave away $500 billion to charity last year. That's the combined GDP of Hungary, of Belgium, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. That's what we voluntarily gave away to charity every year. Imagine how much we would give away if we didn't have a ridiculously high and cumbersome tax system. And I always say, if we abolish the entire welfare state, I guarantee you that Americans would step up and make sure that every poor person had a meal and every person that needed clothing would be taken care of, because that's what makes America different than any other social welfare state across the country. But what am I getting at here? Is that the idea of American exceptionalism, that we should be thankful, not angry that we live in this country, that we should have gratitude, not revolutionary ideas that we live in America. That's the split. And I would continue to make the argument that if we lose the culture, we'll lose everything politically. And the introduction and the defense of these ideas on our campuses right now, nothing could be more important, because they're so under attack and they're so under assault by committed anti-Americans and committed Marxists that no longer hide their Marxism. They will say with great pride the greatest book ever written was the Communist Manifesto. They will say with great pride that communism and socialism is the answer to America, that America is a racist, bigoted, homophobic, horrible country, and that we need revolutionaries to take it over, destroy it, and we can reconstruct something.
Where do those ideas come from them? I look at that as an adult and I say, there's an element of our society that has failed teaching our children the histories of Marxism and communism and postmodernism.
Well, I think it's even greater than that. the history is one component of it, but what Marx got so wrong, he got some, I don't want to say correct, but he observed some things properly. Some of what he observed was not incorrect, such as the accumulation of wealth and stuff. His solutions were horrific. But the thing he got wrong so repeatedly was his analysis of human nature. Was he thought that human beings could be perfected. He thought that we're a byproduct of a broken system and that a broken institutions, we're not broken people. And so what we need to reinforce to the youth is that human beings are broken at birth, that we are sinful by nature. And here's the Judeo-Christian perspective coming in me, and I will defend it, as best as I can, is that we are not going to be able to create perfect systems ever. And we're not going to create perfect people. And so once you admit that individuals are self-centered, that they are going to act in their own best interest, which is all a good thing, by the way, that self-interest behavior can be a virtue, not a bad thing.
You need to incentivize.
That's correct. You need it. Therefore, what economic or societal or cultural system will use the worst inclinations of human beings for the greater benefit of everybody, but also require good behavior and require virtuous conduct? And that is the free market. Is that you cannot lie yourself to the top of a free market. And this, John Stossel says this so well, is that he used to try to find con artists and used to try to find people that would always, essentially sell lies and sell deceit, but they always stopped at the mid to lower level of business. Is that the really successful entrepreneurs, they had to conduct themselves in a semi-virtuous capacity. And so where this is coming from is we're not teaching young people the truth of humanity. We're not teaching them that life is suffering, human beings are broken by nature, there will be an element of brokenness and strife and disagreement, and that our system will always have a component of imperfection because we are imperfect by nature and imperfect at our birth. So what system can then at least allow us to endure it, and we can then try to eliminate as many of those imperfections as possible? And that has always been the free market. The free market solves problems without us ever trying to centrally plan or solve those problems or solutions. The greatest example is the smartphones that all of us have walking around. There was never a central committee in 1995 that said we need to make sure that everyone has a supercomputer in their right-hand pocket for only $400. It just happened. And that's because when entrepreneurs go about something, they find a way to solve problems without ever trying to solve them themselves. They're trying to make money. And the only way you can make money is try to solve other people's problems and give them something they want. Yeah. That's why we don't worry about electricity anymore. Yet most countries, they're amazed that we have the standard of living increases that we have. And so we have to be brutally honest with young people that life sucks, that life is suffering, that no politician, that no government, that no bureaucrat is going to be able to come together in any committee and be able to solve these problems. You're going to have to make better choices for yourself. Get government the hell out of your way, make good choices, and things will eventually get better when entrepreneurs solve those problems.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the reasons, and you talked about Jordan Peterson, and we've had him on our show. I think that's one of the reasons why Jordan Peterson has caught such an incredible gust of enthusiasm and social media. When millions of people are watching him now, and that's his exact message. There is no perfect scenario. There is no perfect system. And yeah, certain things do suck. You have to work at it. He talks about the cure for inequality is worse than the disease.
Exactly right. And so there's a lot of points to that. But from my experience, young people have been told well-crafted lies instead of hard truths. And there is a increasing hunger and desire and a thirst for someone to tell a student that is 21 years old, stop believing in socialism, Marxism, other people to solve your problems. You're going to have to wake up earlier. You're going to have to sit up straight. You're going to have to dress better. You're going to have to make that extra phone call. You're going to have to do something you might not want to do. Right. Stop blaming other people. Stop blaming a broken, institutionally racist, corrupt, bigoted, or homophobic culture to try to solve your problems, because when it comes down to it, what you are blaming is really just individuals interacting with individuals. The best way to eradicate racism is the market. You can't be a racist when you're selling a product to someone. Well, you can. You're just not going to be very good at business. You're going to lose customers.
Right.
And so that's one thing we always have to convey.
Our time is coming to an end here. I greatly appreciate you taking the time. This is a discussion we can have for hours because there are so many more aspects to it. Where can people find you, Charlie?
Sure. You can follow me on Twitter, of which I'm quite active, at CharlieKirk11.
It's a great feed, by the way. Yeah, definitely follow it.
It's definitely controversial. I don't think so. But our website's tpusa.com. They can visit us out. It's Turning Point USA. But in closing, just for those of you that are on the fence or not in support of the president, just understand the historic gains that he's making here. You don't have to agree with him on everything, but we are definitely moving in the right direction for freedom and liberty. And never forget, we live in the greatest country in the history of the world.
Absolutely. Thank you
guys
so much. And folks, you can follow me at David Sussman.
Does
Look
great
for
work.
Whiskey Politics on YouTube, Facebook, and everywhere else, ricochet.com. Thank you all so much. And again, very special thanks to Charlie Kirk.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Great job.
Good, right?
Excellent. Thank you.